Guys, it's Aoife from Fred Weasley Died Laughing, and I'm here with my weekly wrap up. I read 3 books this week and I DNF'd 1, and the first book I finished this week was Ice Like Fire by Sara Raasch. This is the second book in the Snow Like Ashes trilogy. I read Snow Like Ashes in December and I'm really happy I managed to get onto the next book fairly soon. I got this from the library as well, so that was great. So this book trilogy follows a 16-year-old girl called Mira, and she basically lives in this world where there are 8 different kingdoms. There is 4 seasons, 4 rhythm kingdoms, that's what they're called, and Mira is from Winter. And 16 years ago, when Mira was a baby, Winter was actually taken over by Spring, which is run by a tyrannical leader. Winter's queen died and all the people in Winter were basically turned into slaves, and Mira and a couple of her people are on the run. Mira has basically been on the run her entire life, and they're trying to find a way to get Winter's magic back. In the first book, we were basically on this kind of adventure with Mira to try and figure out how to get this talisman back, and in the second book we were following on from a lot of events at the end of the second book, and Mira is in this new role within her kingdom, and she is on this new kind of mission to save the rest of her people. She ends up going on another quest in this book, which could lead to even more power for the rest of the world that she lives in, but also she is a little bit uneasy about that because she kind of feels that access to power could lead to that power being used to do bad things, where she'd rather everyone have no power than everyone have power and a select few using it for bad things. So this book I didn't enjoy as much as the first one, I will admit. It's a little bit longer, I think, but it's also quite dry. It feels longer. It's quite dry, and it's very slow going, and I feel like it's a little bit boring. There's not that much that happens. We're seeing different kingdoms in this one that we didn't see in the first one, and I normally really enjoy seeing all these different types of kingdoms, where with this one I just feel like we didn't really see enough. And also Mira is on this quest in this one, and she's trying to find these particular things that she only really finds out at the start of this book is something that she should be trying to do. And I feel like everything was way too easy for her in this book. It's like everything was just kind of by coincidence, and sometimes that's okay in a book and sometimes it just doesn't feel right. And I just felt like her finding all the things that she needed to find in this book was just really easy, and I don't think it should have been that easy for her. It just didn't feel very realistic in that way. There is a love triangle in this book and in the first book, and I will say the romance wasn't really as strong in this book. There's still kind of that romance, the love triangle there, but there isn't very much romance. It's just kind of there on like the periphery, and I did like that the romance definitely took a backseat to the actual plot in this book. But I will say that I really don't really enjoy the romance that much. It's just a little bit eye-rolly and it's a little bit too angsty, and I don't particularly like either of the male interests. I think I liked the first one of them better in the first one, where in this one I just really didn't like either of them. They're both kind of just like whinge bags, to be honest, and she'd just be better on her own. I did kind of like there was a new female character that was introduced in this one, and the Mira struck up a friendship with her, and I really like to see that, because obviously female friendships are important, and I like to see 2 strong female characters bond like that, and you know, unite forces. And I think we'll see more of that one in the third, so I'm excited to see that. So this was fine. I gave it like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I will read the third book, but hopefully the third book will be a bit better and will be a little bit more exciting than this one. The book I read was Mageborn by Thorne, and I actually have a full review up of that already, so I will leave that link down below or above somewhere. And yeah, so I won't say anything about that. I will give that one 3 out of 5 stars, and I quite enjoyed it. It's a YA fantasy, and yeah, I will leave a link to that one. I then decided to DNF a book this week, and this is really rare for me. You guys know that it's very rare for me to DNF a book, and that was the Bronte Plot by Katherine Reay. This is just a backlist neck alley book I had that I decided to pick up and give a go, and we were following a character called Lucy who kind of works in this kind of antique store, and at the start of the book she meets this guy and she starts going out with him, and she meets his grandmother, and it seems like the grandmother is overly interested in her for this weird reasons. And when things happen between her and her boyfriend, and a secret of hers that's kind of pretty bad is found out, ex's grandmother, her boyfriend becomes her ex, and then her ex's grandmother ends up enlisting her to basically go to England with her and go to all these kind of hotspots of kind of English literature, like something like, you know, like Jane Austen, where Jane Austen grew up, the Brontes, and Beatrix Potter, and she wants to go there and go on this kind of literary tour and also kind of pick up some antiques along the way with her. This one sounded like it should be something I really enjoy, because I just loved the idea of a tour of kind of like literary hotspots in England's countryside, because it just sounded gorgeous and it just sounded really interesting. And this book was just so boring. I got 60% into it and I just couldn't do it anymore. I was just so bored. it just wasn't good. I also think this is, I saw some other reviews saying this is Christian fiction, and I will say there's no mentions of like God or religion in it, but it's very clean in that like there's like hardly any kissing, there's like no romance. She meets the boy that she meets, James, the guy, I should say man, he's a man. The man that she meets, James, she literally meets him in the first chapter. He asks her on a date. The second chapter, they've been going out for like a month and they're apparently already in love with each other. And then in the third chapter, they're broken up and it's only been like maybe 2 months and she's like devastated, and it just seemed really weird. And there was hardly like, I don't think there was even one kiss, or there might have been like a peck, but there wasn't even a kiss. And it just like, there's just no chemistry there. There was nothing sizzling between them. I couldn't really root for the romance because it just seemed nonsensical. It just came out of nowhere and I just couldn't understand why it was happening, and then why she cared so much. And then the character of Lucy is just not a very nice person either. Like she's basically ends up like committing fraud, and that's like, you know, you shouldn't do that, particularly if you work in a, like, you know, a fucking antique store. You should probably not dabble in fraud at all, even if it's just like a little bit of fraud. And then there's a couple of moments in this book, up until where I read anyway, where she treated people really badly. Like when she'd go into a restaurant and she hadn't made a reservation, and then she'd like trick the waiter or waitress into either thinking that they had messed up the reservation that she had made, or like just making this kind of weird thing of how like she had a blog post and she was going to blog about the restaurant, how shame it was that she wouldn't be able to eat there because she wouldn't be able to blog about it, and just like guilt trip people into like giving her a table. And it was just really off-putting, and I just really didn't like her character at all. It was kind of like the author was trying to push her as being actually this really nice person who just had some bad judgment here and there, but she actually just was a bit of an asshole, and I just really didn't like her. So yeah, it was just really, really boring. There was nothing happening in it. I got to 60% through and they hadn't really even made it to like any of the literary places that they said they were going to make it to. They'd only been to like London for a little bit. So I just didn't want to do it anymore. So I DNF'd it. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars because I had read over half of it. But yeah, I really didn't enjoy it. And then the last book I want to talk about in this wrap up is Behind Closed Doors by B.A. Paris. This is B.A. Paris's first book, and it's the last book of hers I had left to read, and now I have finished it, so I've read all of her books, which I am very happy about. So this one is about a married couple called Jack and Grace who seem to be absolutely perfect. They have a wonderful house, they seem to have the perfect marriage, and this book is basically about what is actually happening behind that marriage and how Grace is essentially a little bit trapped in her own home and in her own marriage, and how there is something terrible that's keeping her there. The fear of something terrible happening to a loved one is keeping her there. And this whole book, we see from the get-go that Grace is in a very terrible situation. She is in a particularly not a physically abusive relationship, but a very, very emotionally abusive relationship. And we basically see how Grace ended up in this relationship, how she was tricked into believing she was marrying someone good, and basically how she's trying to figure out how to get out of it, and is there any way to get out of it safely. It was just really, really fast paced for me. I started this on like Saturday evening and I finished it on like Sunday morning because I just couldn't put it down. I can't remember the last time I read a book so fast, which is one of the things I love about B.A. Paris's writing, is that you just get so sucked in and you just keep flipping those pages until you're finished, and I love when that happens. So I did really, really enjoy reading this because I just couldn't look away from this book. I just needed to know what happened. I needed to know what happened in the next chapter. I needed to know what Grace was going to do next. I needed to know what Jack was going to do next to her. I will say there were times within this book, first of all, it kind of like, there was times where you see Grace before her in her marriage, and you kind of see how she kind of walked into this really bad situation, and there seemed to be so many warning signs that she just like ignored, and it's kind of frustrating to read as a reader and seeing that she just kind of walked herself into this really bad situation. And there were times as well when Jack was talking to Grace, or when Jack was talking to anyone in this book, and the way he talked just seemed really unrealistic. And it's one of the things that's just one of my pet peeves, when dialogue seems unrealistic and people are talking in ways that I don't think real people would talk about, particularly to like their friends. And yeah, I just like, Jack is supposed to be like, he's supposed to be this really educated guy, he's a lawyer, and he's supposed to be very smart, but I still don't think he would really have talked like that. He just was too like, everything was just too perfect basically. I did really enjoy how this ended up. I will say I wasn't really like shocked at anything. There were no kind of big massive thrills in this book, but I was still very much addicted to the story without it being thrilling or shocking in any way. There was at the very end of this, there was a conversation between 2 female characters in the book as well, which I really, really enjoyed. I just loved that conversation, and it seemed like it was such a normal thing at the end of the book, but it was just so, there was just something about it. It was just like this camaraderie, like this kind of just like a women sticking up for women thing that I just really enjoyed with it. So yeah, I really enjoyed just seeing that there too. So I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars, and I did really enjoy it. Not my favourite BA Paris read, but not my least favourite either. So I'm really happy to have read all of her books now. So that's everything I've read this week and not read this week. So please let me know what you guys have read, and I would love to know. Please leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys again next time. Bye.